Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next presidential series installment. This week I'm here with Henry.
Hi.
And today we're going to take a look at who, Henry?
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
That's right, Dwight D. Eisenhower. What number president is he?
The 34th.
The 34th president of the United States. Very good. Hey Henry, who do you like?
I like Ike.
I like Ike too. And apparently so does the whole country. I like Ike. Ike was Dwight D. Eisenhower's nickname. And we're going to tell you some really cool things about Dwight D. Eisenhower. From his birthplace and childhood in the Midwest, all the way as he rose the ranks in the U.S. military to eventually become President of the United States. But first, before we get into Dwight D. Eisenhower, Henry, tell the people what they have to do.
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments and questions, and give us a thumbs up.
That's right. Good job. Hit subscribe down below. Leave all those comments and questions, right? We love those. Give us a like and thumbs up. And, of course, what do they got to do?
Hit that little notification bell.
That's right. Hit that little notification bell so you can be notified when we do release a new video, which is, Henry, come on, tell them.
Every week.
Every single week. That's right. So now, here we go. Our next presidential series installment, taking a look at the 34th President of the United States, Dwight D. Eisenhower. And this is
Dead History.
Dead History. Hey guys, how's it going? TJ back here with Henry.
Hi.
And behind us, good old Ike.
Yep.
Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 34th President of the United States. And we have some cool things to tell you about Ike, such as he actually was a 5-star general in the U.S. military. Yes, in actually World War II, a 5-star general. Crazy, right?
5 stars.
5 stars. And in the 1950s, when Dwight D. Eisenhower was president, our country had some of the greatest stretch of prosperity and just good-natured everything that was going on in the country at the time. As a matter of fact, some people say that all Dwight D. Eisenhower really had to do was play golf on the White House lawn, which he did a lot of. He loved to play golf. We're going to get into all that stuff. You did the likes, you did the subscribes, you did all that stuff. Hopefully you're leaving those comments and questions.
Yep.
We get the comments from, let's see, we got Noah, Logan, and Rebecca, and Les, and Scott. And Gracie, and who else? Dominic. I mean, all of them. I mean, they're great. They're wonderful. We love you guys. Thank you so much. And we also wanted to give a little bit of a shout out real quick to Rebecca, one of our most loyal and best subscribers. She actually has been suffering with some dental work she had done. She's in a little bit of pain, and she's trying to get better, and it's been a little bit of a long process for her. So, you know, Rebecca, we hope you feel better soon, right?
Yes, we do.
Get well soon. So now, here we go. Taking a look at the 34th President of the United States in this next presidential series installment. The man behind us, right?
Yep.
Good old Ike, Dwight D. Eisenhower. But first, Henry, what do they have to do? We almost forgot. What do they got to grab?
Get the potato chips and soda.
That's right. I can't believe we almost forgot your key line. Yes, get the potato chips, get the soda, get the pretzels, get the popcorn, or get those nasty Doritos, ranch Doritos that you love. Makes the whole house smell. So get anything you want to snack on and sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey guys, welcome. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to this next presidential series installment, taking a look at the 34th President of the United States, Dwight David Eisenhower. I am flying solo for the audio portion of things. Henry's not with me for the audio. And I am recording the audio in a little bit of a different spot and location in my house. So I've done this in the past, so I hope it sounds okay, and I hope the audio doesn't have any background noise or anything like that. So we are going to jump right in here. You know, it's really surprising to me that we're at the 34th already. That means just let's count it out. Not including Eisenhower, we have Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Reagan, Bush. We only have 6 left after this. That is crazy. So that's how close we are getting to the end of this presidential series. And then, of course, I've announced this in the past, but just so everyone knows, we will be moving on to the vice presidents after this. Every single week, I will be doing a video on a vice president, going in chronological order, just like we did with the presidents. Now, keep in mind, we'll go over some things with the vice presidents, but those videos will probably be done in just one part, probably like one 30-minute type video in length. I doubt the vice presidents will need 2 parts. I don't think, at least, because there's also not as much information out there on the vice presidents, some of them especially, as there is on the president. So, all right, here we go. Dwight David Eisenhower. Dwight David Eisenhower was born on October 14th of 1890 in Denison, Texas. He was the third of 7 sons born to David J. Eisenhower and Ida Stover. His mother originally named him David Dwight, but reversed the 2 names after his birth to avoid the confusion of having 2 Davids in the family. All of the boys were called Ike, such as Big Ike, who was Edgar, and Little Ike, who was Dwight. The nickname was intended as an abbreviation of their last name, but by World War II, only Dwight was still called Ike. In 1892, the family moved to Abilene, Kansas, which Eisenhower considered his hometown. As a child, he was involved in an accident that cost his younger brother Earl an eye, for which he was remorseful for the remainder of his life. Dwight developed a keen and enduring interest in exploring the outdoors. He learned about hunting and fishing, cooking, and card playing from an illiterate named Bob Davis, who camped on the Smoky Hill River. While Eisenhower's mother was against war, it was her collection of history books that first sparked Eisenhower's early and lasting interest in military history. He persisted in reading the books in her collection and became a voracious reader on the subject. Other favorite subjects early in his education were arithmetic and spelling. His parents set aside specific times at breakfast and at dinner for daily family Bible reading. Chores were regularly assigned and rotated among all the children, and misbehavior was met with unequivocal discipline, usually from David. His mother, previously a member with David of the River Brethren sect of the Mennonites, joined the International Bible Students Association, later known as Jehovah's Witnesses. The Eisenhower home served as the local meeting hall from 1896 to 1915. Though Eisenhower never joined the International Bible Students, his later decision to attend West Point saddened his mother, who felt that warfare was rather wicked, but she did not overrule his decision. While speaking of himself in 1948, Eisenhower said, "He was one of the most deeply religious men I knew. Though unattached to any sect or organization, he was baptized in the Presbyterian Church in 1953. Eisenhower attended Abilene High School and graduated with the class of 1909. As a freshman, he injured his knee and developed a leg infection that extended into his groin, which his doctor diagnosed as life-threatening. The doctor insisted that the leg be amputated, but Dwight refused to allow it, and surprisingly recovered, though he had to repeat his freshman year. He and his brother Edgar both wanted to attend college, though they lacked the funds. They made a pact to take alternate years at college while the other worked to earn the tuitions. Edgar took the first turn at school, and Dwight was employed as a night supervisor at the Bell Springs Creamery. When Edgar asked for a second year, Dwight consented and worked for a second year. At that time, a friend Swede HAZLETT was applying to the Naval Academy and urged Dwight to apply to the school, since no tuition was required. Eisenhower requested consideration for either Annapolis or West Point with his U.S. Senator Joseph L. Bristow. Though Eisenhower was among the winners of the entrance exam competition, he was beyond the age limit for the Naval Academy. He then accepted an appointment to West Point in 1911. At West Point, Eisenhower relished the emphasis on traditions and on sports, but was less enthusiastic about the hazing, though he willingly accepted it as a plebe. He was also a regular violator of the more detailed regulations, and he finished school with a less than stellar discipline rating. Academically, Eisenhower's best subject by far was English. Otherwise, his performance was average, though he thoroughly enjoyed the typical emphasis of engineering on science and mathematics. In athletics, Eisenhower later said that not making the baseball team at West Point was one of the greatest disappointments of my life, and maybe my greatest. He made the varsity football team and was a starter as running back and linebacker in 1912 when he tackled the legendary Jim Thorpe of the Carlisle Indians. Eisenhower suffered a torn knee while being tackled in the next game, which was the last he played. He re-injured his knee on horseback and in the boxing ring, so he turned to fencing and gymnastics. Eisenhower later served as junior varsity football coach and cheerleader. He graduated in the middle of the class of 1915, which became known as the class the stars fell on, because 59 members eventually became general officers. So now moving on to World War I. After graduation in 1915, Second Lieutenant Eisenhower requested an assignment in the Philippines, which was denied. He served initially in logistics and then the infantry at various camps in Texas and Georgia until 1918. In 1916, while stationed at Fort Sam Houston, Eisenhower was football coach for St. Louis College, now St. Mary's University. Eisenhower was an honorary member of the Sigma Beta Chi, or Sigma Beta Chi fraternity at St. Mary's University. In late 1917, while he was in charge of training at Fort Oglethorpe in Georgia, his wife Mamie had their first son. When the U.S. entered World War I, he immediately requested an overseas assignment, but was again denied and then assigned to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. In February of 1918, he was transferred to Camp Meade in Maryland with the 65th Engineers. So just a little side note, my father, who was in the Vietnam War, he was in the Army. That's actually where he was stationed at first, Fort Meade, Maryland. So pretty interesting little fact for me. His unit was later ordered to France, but to his chagrin, he received orders for the new Tank Corps, where he was promoted to Brevet Lieutenant Colonel in the National Army. He commanded a unit that trained tank crews at Camp Colt, his first command at the site of Pickett's Charge on the Gettysburg, Pennsylvania Civil War battleground. Though Eisenhower and his tank crews never saw combat, he displayed excellent organizational skills as well as his ability to accurately assess junior officer strengths and make optimal placements of personnel. Once again, his spirits were raised when the unit under his command received orders overseas to France. This time, his wishes were thwarted when the armistice was signed a week before his departure date. Completely missing out on the war front left him depressed and bitter for a time, despite receiving the Distinguished Service Medal for his work at home. In World War II, rivals who had combat service in the First Great War, led by General Bernard Montgomery, sought to denigrate sought to denigrate Eisenhower for his previous lack of combat duty, despite his stateside experience establishing a camp completely equipped for thousands of troops and developing a full combat training schedule. After the war, Eisenhower reverted to his regular rank of captain and a few days later was promoted to major, a rank he held for 16 years. The major was assigned in 1919 to a transcontinental army convoy to test vehicles and dramatize the need for improved roads in the nation. Indeed, the convoy averaged only 5 miles per hour from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco. Later, the improvement of highways became a signature issue for Eisenhower as president. He assumed duties again at Camp Meade, Maryland, commanding a battalion of tanks, where he remained until 1922. His schooling continued, focused on the nature of the next war and the role of the tank in it. His new expertise in tank warfare was strengthened by a close collaboration with George S. Patton, Sereno E. Brett, and other senior tank leaders. Their leading-edge ideas of speed-oriented offensive tank warfare were strongly discouraged by superiors, who considered the new approach too radical and preferred to continue using tanks in a strictly supportive role for the infantry. Eisenhower was even threatened with court-martial for continued publication of these proposed methods of tank deployment, and he relented. From 1920, Eisenhower served under a succession of talented generals: Fox Connor, John G. Pershing, Douglas MacArthur, and George Marshall. And during the late 1920s and early 1930s, Eisenhower's career in post-war army stalled somewhat. As military priorities diminished, many of his friends resigned for high-paying business jobs. Eisenhower was assigned to the American Battle Monuments Commission, directed by General Pershing. And with the help of his brother Milton Eisenhower, then a journalist at the U.S. Agriculture Department, he produced a guide to American battlefields in Europe. He then was assigned to Army War College and graduated in 1928. After a one-year assignment in France, Eisenhower served as executive officer to General George V. Moseley, Assistant Secretary of War, from 1929 to February of 1933. Major Dwight D. Eisenhower graduated from the Army Industrial College in 1933 and later served on the faculty, and it was later expanded to become the Industrial College of the Armed Services. It is now known as the Dwight D. Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy. That's kind of leading us all the way up to almost the mid-30s here now with Eisenhower. He started off and he just kind of worked his way up. Now we're kind of at the mid-30s here. His primary duty was planning for the next war, which proved most difficult in the midst of the Great Depression. He then was posted as Chief Military Aide to General Douglas MacArthur, Army Chief of Staff. In 1932, he participated in the clearing of the Bonus March encampment in Washington, D.C. Although he was against the actions taken against the veterans and strongly advised MacArthur against taking a public role in it, he later wrote the Army's official incident report endorsing MacArthur's conduct. In 1935, he accompanied MacArthur to the Philippines, where he served as assistant military advisor to the Philippine government in developing their army. Dwight Eisenhower had strong philosophical disagreements with MacArthur regarding the role of the Philippine Army and the leadership qualities that an American Army officer should exhibit and develop in his subordinates. The resulting antipathy between Eisenhower and MacArthur lasted the rest of their lives. So there was definitely some tension there. Historians have concluded that this assignment provided valuable preparation for handling the challenging personalities of Winston Churchill, George S. Patton, George Marshall, and Bernard Montgomery during World War II. Eisenhower later emphasized that too much had been made of the disagreements with MacArthur and that a positive relationship endured. While in Manila, Mamie suffered a life-threatening stomach ailment but recovered fully. Eisenhower was promoted to the rank of Permanent Lieutenant Colonel in 1936. He also learned to fly, making a solo flight over the Philippines in 1937, and he obtained his private pilot's license in 1939 at Fort Lewis. Also around this time, he was offered a post by the Philippine Commonwealth government, namely by then Philippine President Manuel L. QUEZON, on recommendations by MacArthur, to become the chief of police of a new capital being planned, now named Quezon City, but he declined the offer. Eisenhower returned to the United States in December of 1939 and was assigned as commanding officer of the 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment at Fort Lewis, Washington, later becoming the regimental executive officer. In March of 1941, he was promoted to colonel and assigned as chief of staff of the newly activated 9 Corps under Major General Kenyon Joyce. In June of 1941, he was appointed chief of staff to General Walter KRUEGER, commander of the 3rd Army at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. After successfully participating in the Louisiana maneuvers, he was promoted to brigadier general on October 3rd of 1941. Although his administrative abilities had been noticed, on the eve of the American entry into World War II, he had never held an active command above a battalion and was far from being considered by many as a potential commander of major operations. So that kind of leads us all the way up to World War II. And, I want to kind of go back. I was going to do it at the end of all the war stuff with Eisenhower, but I'll do it now regarding him and his wife and meeting his wife and that sort of thing and getting married. While Eisenhower was actually stationed in Texas, he met Mamie DOUD of Boone, Iowa. They were immediately taken with each other, and Eisenhower proposed to her on Valentine's Day in 1916. A November wedding date in Denver was moved up to July 1st due to the pending U.S. entry into World War I. They moved many times during their first 35 years of marriage. The Eisenhowers had 2 sons, Dowd Dwight Icky Eisenhower, who died of scarlet fever at the age of 3, and Eisenhower was mostly reluctant to discuss his death. Their second son, John Eisenhower, was born in Denver, Colorado. John served in the U.S. Army, retired as brigadier general, and became an author and served as U.S. ambassador to Belgium from 1961 to 1979. Coincidentally, John graduated from West Point on D-Day, June 6th of 1944. Dwight Eisenhower was a golf enthusiast later in life, and he joined the Augusta National Golf Club in 1948. He played golf frequently during and after his presidency and was unreserved in expressing his passion for the game, to the point of golfing during the winter. He ordered his golf balls painted black so he could see them better against snow on the ground. He had a small, basic golf facility installed at Camp David and became close friends with the Augusta National Chairman Clifford Roberts, inviting Roberts to stay at the White House on numerous occasions. Roberts, an investment broker, also handled the Eisenhower family's investments. Oil painting was one of Dwight Eisenhower's hobbies. He began painting while at Columbia University, and after watching Thomas E. Stevens paint Mamie's portrait, in order to relax, Eisenhower painted about 260 oils during the last 20 years of his life. The images were mostly of landscapes, but also portraits of subjects such as Mamie, their grandchildren, General Montgomery, George Washington, and Abraham Lincoln. Angels in the Outfield was Dwight Eisenhower's favorite movie. His favorite reading material for relaxation were the Western novels of Zane Grey. With his excellent memory and ability to focus, Eisenhower was skilled at card games. He learned poker, which he called his favorite indoor sport, in Abilene. That's where he learned it, in Abilene, Kansas. Eisenhower recorded West Point classmates' poker losses for payment after graduation and later stopped playing because his opponents resenting having to pay him. Pretty funny stuff. So there you go. Just a little bit about some personal things with him and the fact that him and his wife, they had 2 sons. One died very young, and then, another son. So that leads us right up to the World War II stuff. And here we go. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Dwight Eisenhower was assigned to the General Staff in Washington, where he served until June of 1942, with responsibility for creating the major war plans to defeat Japan and Germany. He was appointed Deputy Chief in charge of Pacific Defenses under the Chief of War Plans Division, General Leonard T. GEROW, and then succeeded GEROW as Chief of the War Plans Division. Next, he was appointed Assistant Chief of Staff in charge of the New Operations Division under Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall, who spotted talent and promoted accordingly. At the end of May of 1942, Dwight Eisenhower accompanied Lieutenant General HENRI H. ARNOLD, Commanding General of the Army Air Forces, to London to assess the effectiveness of the theater commander in England, Major General James E. Chaney. He returned to Washington on June 3rd with a pessimistic assessment, stating he had an uneasy feeling about Chaney and his staff. On June 23rd of 1942, Eisenhower returned to London as Commanding General, European Theater of Operations, based in London, and with a house on Coombe, Kingston upon Thames, and took over command from Chaney. He was promoted to Lieutenant General on July 7th. In November of 1942, Dwight Eisenhower was also appointed Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary Force of the North African Theater of Operations, through the new operational headquarters, Allied Force Headquarters. The word expeditionary was dropped soon after his appointment for security reasons. The campaign in North Africa was designated Operation Torch and was planned in the underground headquarters within the Rock of Gibraltar. Eisenhower was the first non-British person to command Gibraltar in 200 years. That's amazing. French cooperation was deemed necessary to the campaign, and Eisenhower encountered a preposterous situation with the multiple rival factions in France. His primary objective was to move forces successfully into Tunisia, and intending to facilitate that objective, he gave his support to Francois Darlan as High Commissioner in North Africa. Despite Darlan's previous high offices of state in Vichy, France, and his continued role as Commander-in-Chief of the French Armed Forces, the Allied leaders were thunderstruck by this from a political standpoint, though none of them had offered Eisenhower guidance with the problem in the course of planning the operation. Eisenhower was severely criticized for the move. Darlan was assassinated on December 24th by Ferdinand Bonnier de la Chapelle. Eisenhower did not take action to prevent the arrest and extrajudicial execution of Bonnier de la Chapelle by associates of Darlan acting without authority from either Vichy or the Allies, considering a criminal rather than a military matter. Eisenhower later appointed as High Commissioner General Henri GIRAUD, who had been installed by the Allies as Darlan's Commander-in-Chief and who had refused to postpone the execution. Operation Torch also served as a valuable training ground for Eisenhower's combat command skills. During the initial phase of it's Erwin Rommel's move into the Kasserine Pass. It's General Feldmarschall. It was Erwin Rommel's move into the Kasserine Pass, is what it was. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, as he's known. Eisenhower created some confusion in the ranks by some interference with the execution of battle plans by his subordinates. He also was initially indecisive in his removal of Lloyd Freudenthal, commanding U.S. II Corps. He basically became adamant in such matters in later campaigns. In February 1943, his authority was extended as commander of AFHQ across the Mediterranean basin to include the British Eighth Army, commanded by General Sir Bernard Montgomery. The Eighth Army had advanced across the western desert from the east and was ready for the start of the Tunisia campaign. Eisenhower gained his fourth star and gave up command of the ETO USA to become commander of the NATO USA. After the capitulation of Axis forces in North Africa, Eisenhower oversaw the invasion of Sicily. Once Mussolini, the Italian leader, had fallen in Italy, the Allies switched their attention to the mainland with Operation Avalanche. But while General Eisenhower argued with President Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill, who both insisted on unconditional terms of surrender in exchange for helping the Italians, the Germans pursued an aggressive buildup of forces in the country. The Germans made the already tough battle more difficult by adding 19 divisions and initially outnumbering the Allied forces 2-1. In December of 1943, President Roosevelt decided that Eisenhower, not Marshall, would be Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. The following month, he resumed command of ETO USA, and the following month was officially designated as the Supreme Allied Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, serving in a dual role until the end of hostilities in Europe in May of 1945. He was charged in these positions with planning and carrying out the Allied assault on the coast of Normandy in June of 1944 under the codename Operation Overlord, the liberation of Western Europe and the invasion of Germany. Eisenhower, as well as the officers and troops under him, had learned valuable lessons in their previous operations, and their skills had all strengthened in preparation for the next most difficult campaign against the Germans, a beach landing assault. His first struggles, however, were with Allied leaders and officers on matters vital to the success of the Normandy invasion. He argued with Roosevelt over an essential agreement with de Gaulle to use French resistance forces in covert and sabotage operations against the Germans in advance of Operation Overlord. Admiral Ernest J. King fought with Eisenhower over King's refusal to provide additional landing craft from the Pacific. Eisenhower also insisted that the British give him exclusive command over all strategic air forces to facilitate Overlord, to the point of threatening to resign unless Churchill relented, which he did. Eisenhower then designed a bombing plan in France in advance of Overlord and argued with Churchill over the latter's concern with civilian casualties. De Gaulle interjected that the casualties were justified in shedding the yoke of the Germans, and Eisenhower prevailed. He also had to skillfully manage to retain the services of the often unruly George S. Patton by severely reprimanding him when Patton earlier had slapped a subordinate, and then when Patton gave a speech in which he made improper comments about post-war policy. The D-Day Normandy landings on June 6th of 1944 were costly but successful. 2 months later, on August 15th, the invasion of southern France took place, and control of forces in the southern invasion passed from the AFHQ to the SHAEF. Many thought that victory in Europe would come by summer's end, but the Germans did not capitulate for almost a year. From then until the end of the war in Europe on May 8th of 1945, Eisenhower, through SHAEF, commanded all Allied forces, and through his command of ETO USA, he had administrative command of all U.S. forces on the Western Front north of the Alps. He was ever mindful of the inevitable loss of life and suffering that would be experienced on an individual level by the troops under his command and their families. This prompted him to make a point of visiting every division involved in the invasion. Eisenhower's sense of responsibility was underscored by his draft of a statement to be issued if the invasion failed. It has been called one of the great speeches of history. Our landings in the Cherbourg-Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. Once the coastal assault had succeeded, Eisenhower insisted on retaining personal control over the land battle strategy and was immersed in the command and supply of multiple assaults through France on Germany. Field Marshal Montgomery insisted priority to be given to his 21st Army Group's attack being made in the north, while Generals Bradley and Devers insisted they be given priority in the center and south of the front. Eisenhower worked tirelessly to address the demands of the rival commanders to optimize Allied forces, often by giving them tactical latitude. Many historians concluded this delayed the Allied victory in Europe. However, due to Eisenhower's persistence, the pivotal supply port of Antwerp was successfully, albeit belatedly, opened in late 1944. In recognition of his senior position in the Allied command, on December 20th of 1944, he was promoted to the General of the Army, equivalent to the rank of Field Marshal in most European armies. And this and the previous high commands he held, Eisenhower showed his great talents for leadership and diplomacy. Although he had never seen action himself, he won the respect of frontline commanders. He interacted adeptly with allies such as Winston Churchill, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and General Charles de Gaulle. He had serious disagreements with Churchill and Montgomery over questions of strategy, but these rarely upset his relationships with them. He dealt with Soviet Marshal Zhukov, his Russian counterpart, as they became good friends. In December of 1944, the Germans launched a surprise counter-offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, which the Allies turned back in early 1945 after Eisenhower repositioned his armies and improved weather allowed the Army, Air Force to engage. German defenses continued to deteriorate on both the Eastern Front with the Red Army and the Western Front with the Western Allies. The British wanted to capture Berlin, but Eisenhower decided it would be a military mistake for him to attack Berlin and said orders to that effect would have to be explicit. The British backed down, but then wanted Eisenhower to move into Czechoslovakia for political reasons. Washington refused to support Churchill's plan to use Eisenhower's army for political maneuvers against Moscow. The actual division of Germany followed the lines that Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had previously agreed upon. The Soviet Red Army captured Berlin in a very large-scale bloody battle, and the Germans finally surrendered on May 7th of 1945. And in 1945, Eisenhower anticipated that someday an attempt would be made to recharacterize Nazi crimes as propaganda, and took steps against it by demanding extensive still and movie photographic documentation of Nazi death camps. So that kind of leads us all the way up to after World War II now. So, this is really going through the ranks of all his military career, Dwight D. Eisenhower's. Following the German unconditional surrender, Eisenhower was appointed military governor of the American occupation zone located primarily in southern Germany and headquartered at the IG Farben building in Frankfurt. Upon discovery of the Nazi concentration camps, he ordered camera crews to document evidence of the atrocities in them for use in the Nuremberg trials. He reclassified German prisoners of war in U.S. custody as disarmed enemy forces who were no longer subject to the Geneva Convention. Eisenhower followed the orders laid down by the Joint Chiefs of Staff in directive, but softened them by bringing in 400,000 tons of food for civilians and allowing more fraternization. In November of 1945, Eisenhower returned to Washington to replace Marshall as Chief of Staff of the Army. His main role was the rapid demobilization of millions of soldiers, a job that was delayed by lack of shipping. Eisenhower was convinced in 1946 that the Soviet Union did not want war and that friendly relations could be maintained. He strongly supported the new United Nations and favored its involvement in the control of atomic bombs. However, in formulating policies regarding the atomic bomb and relations with the Soviets, Truman was guided by the U.S. State Department and ignored Eisenhower and the Pentagon. Indeed, Eisenhower had opposed the use of the atomic bomb against the Japanese, writing, "First, the Japanese were ready to surrender, and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing. Second, I hated to see our country be the first to use such a weapon." In June of 1943, a visiting politician had suggested to Eisenhower that he might become president of the United States after the war. Believing that a general should not participate in politics, Merlo J. Pusey wrote that, figuratively speaking, Eisenhower kicked his political-minded visitor out of his office. As others asked him about his political future, Eisenhower told one that he could not imagine wanting to be considered for any political job, from dog catcher to Grand High Supreme King of the Universe, and another that he could not serve as Army Chief of Staff if others believed he had political ambitions. In 1945, Truman told Dwight Eisenhower during the Potsdam Conference that if desired, the president would help the general win the 1948 election. And in 1947, he offered to run as Eisenhower's running mate on the Democratic ticket if MacArthur won the Republican nomination. As the election approached, other prominent citizens and politicians from both parties urged Eisenhower to run for president. In January of 1948, after learning of plans in New Hampshire to elect delegates supporting him for the forthcoming Republican National Convention, Eisenhower stated through the Army that he was not available for and could not accept nomination to high political office. Lifelong professional soldiers, he wrote, in the absence of some of obvious and overriding reason, should abstain from seeking high political office. Eisenhower maintained no political party affiliation during this time. Many believed he was foregoing his only opportunity to be president, as Republican Thomas E. Dewey was considered the probable winner and would presumably serve 2 terms, meaning that Eisenhower, at age 66 in 1956, would be too old to have another chance to run. And in 1948, Eisenhower became president of Columbia University, an Ivy League university in New York City, where he was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa. The choice was subsequently characterized as not having been a good fit for either party. During that year, Eisenhower's memoir, Crusade in Europe, was published. Critics regarded it as one of the finest U.S. military memoirs, and it was a major financial success as well. Eisenhower sought the advice of Augusta National's Roberts about the tax implications of this, and in due course, Eisenhower's profit of the book was substantially aided by what author David Petrusa calls a ruling without precedent by the U.S. Department of the Treasury. It held that Eisenhower was not a professional writer, but rather marketing the lifetime asset of his experiences, and thus he had to pay only capital gains tax on his $635 advance instead of the much higher personal tax rate. This ruling saved Eisenhower about $400,000. Eisenhower's stint as president of Columbia University was punctuated by his activity within the Council of Foreign Relations, a study group he led as president concerning the political and military implications of the Marshall Plan and the American Assembly. Eisenhower's vision of a great cultural center where business, professional, and governmental leaders could meet from time to time to discuss and reach conclusions concerning problems of a social and political nature. Eisenhower accepted the presidency of the university to expand his ability to promote the American form of democracy through education. He was clear on this point to the trustees involved in the search committee. He informed them that his main purpose was to promote the basic concepts of education in a democracy. Within months of beginning his tenure as the president of the university, Eisenhower was requested to advise U.S. Secretary of Defense James Forrestal on the unification of the armed services. About 6 months after his appointment, he became the informal chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington. 2 months later, he fell ill with what was diagnosed as acute gastroenteritis, and he spent over a month in recovery at the Augusta National Golf Club. He returned to his post in New York in mid-May, and in July of 1949, he took a 2-month vacation out of state. Because the American Assembly had begun to take shape, he traveled around the country during the mid to late 1950, building financial support from Columbia Associates and Alumni Association. Eisenhower was unknowingly building resentment and a reputation among the Columbia University faculty and staff as an absentee president who was using the university for his own interests. As a career military man, he naturally had little in common with the academics. So that was kind of it, just kind of going over that. That was, obviously, he was part of the Columbia University as a president of Columbia University. The trustees of Columbia University declined to accept Eisenhower's offer to resign in December of 1950 when he took an extended leave from the university to become the Supreme Commander of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and he was given operational command of NATO forces in Europe. Eisenhower actually retired from active service as an Army general on June 3rd of 1952, and he resumed his presidency of Columbia. Meanwhile, Eisenhower had become the Republican Party nominee for the President of the United States, a contest that he won on November 4th. Eisenhower tendered his resignation as university president on November 15th of 1952. It was effective on January 19th of 1953, the day before his inauguration. That kind of leads us up to, Eisenhower's presidency. Just some fun facts. I always like to do that. Fun facts about each guy. So his birth name, as I said, it was David Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower's parents originally gave him the same first name as his father, David. However, the future president's mother, Ida, soon had second thoughts. She didn't want her boy mistakenly called David Eisenhower Jr. His father, David Jacob Eisenhower, had a different middle name. Or deal with the confusion of having two Davids in the house, so she transposed his name to Dwight David Eisenhower. His original birth name, however, remained inked in the family Bible and was printed in his high school yearbook. Pretty cool. Eisenhower, as I said, he never saw active combat. Although he spent 35 years in the military and served during both world wars, Eisenhower never saw a single day of active combat. After graduating from the U.S. Military Academy in 1915, he served at various camps across the United States. Eisenhower requested an overseas assignment when America entered World War I, but he remained in training roles at home. By the time the United States entered World War II, more than 2 decades later, Eisenhower had risen to become one of America's top generals. He eventually was appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in Europe. Camp David, which many people know of about the presidency, is actually named after his grandson. Presidents Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman originally called the Maryland Presidential Retreat, which opened in 1938, Shangri-La, after the fictional Himalayan paradise. Eisenhower, however, wanted a less formal moniker, so he renamed it in 1953 in honor of his 5-year-old grandson, David. Shangri-La was just a little fancy for a Kansas farm boy, he wrote in a 1953 letter to friend Edward SWEDE HAZLETT. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who was brought by Eisenhower to the retreat, thought it sounded like a place where stray dogs were sent to die. But President John F. Kennedy and all subsequent chief executives have kept the name. What else can I tell you here about Eisenhower early on? He has his Midwestern roots. Young Dwight Eisenhower grew up in Abilene, Kansas, where he excelled as an athlete. And in 1911, he earned an appointment to West Point, where he played football and was an average student. Jim Thorpe helped advance Eisenhower's military career. Eisenhower was mostly focused on football at West Point until he literally ran into the legendary Jim Thorpe in a contest against Carlisle in 1912. Eisenhower developed a knee injury that ended his playing days. George Patton was an early Eisenhower friend in the military. Both men started advocating for the use of tanks in modern warfare in the early 1920s. His superiors, who supported infantry warfare, were not happy with Ike. Eisenhower excelled at academics after West Point. Named as a student at Fort Leavenworth Command and General Staff College, Eisenhower was first in his class of 245 officers, which made him a commodity in demand with Army leadership circles. Eisenhower became known as a planning and logistics expert. Eisenhower was General Douglas MacArthur's chief of staff, and then he worked with Army Chief of Staff George Marshall. He became a natural choice to oversee the Allied invasions of West Europe. As I said a little bit ago, Eisenhower opposed using nuclear weapons on Japan. He believed that a Japanese surrender was imminent. And in the summer of 1945, President Harry Truman, with access to other opinions and information, decided otherwise. What else here now? Just making sure I don't have anything else for you guys. He attended West Point. He came from a poor family. He decided to join the military to get a free college education. He attended West Point from 1911 to 1915. And Eisenhower graduated from West Point as a second lieutenant and then continued his education at the Army War College. Mamie Dowd came from a wealthy family in Iowa. She met Dwight Eisenhower while visiting Texas, and as an Army wife, she moved 20 times with her husband. They had one child who lived to maturity, David Eisenhower. He would follow in his father's footsteps at West Point and became an Army officer. In later life, he was appointed as ambassador to Belgium by President Nixon. As I already touched on, he never saw combat duty. He toiled in relative obscurity as a junior officer until General George C. Marshall recognized his skills and assisted him in moving through the ranks. Surprisingly, in his 35 years of duty, he never saw active combat. Eisenhower became commander of all U.S. forces in Europe in June of 1942. In this role, he led the invasions of North Africa and Sicily, along with taking back Italy from German control. For his efforts, he was awarded the post of Supreme Allied Commander in February of 1944 and placed in charge of Operation Overlord. For his successful efforts against the Axis powers, he was made a 5-star general in December of 1944. He led the Allies throughout the retaking of Europe. Eisenhower accepted Germany's surrender in May of 1945. He was Supreme Commander of NATO. After a brief respite from the military as the president of Columbia University, Eisenhower was called back to active duty. President Harry S. Truman appointed him the Supreme Commander of NATO, and he served in this position until 1952. And let's see, last but not least, do we have anything else here? We know that his birth name was slightly different. We already know all that. Let's see, Ike is the entire family's nickname. Speaking of names, it's easy to assume that his nickname, Ike, came from his first name, but the nickname stems from Eisenhower, and it's the nickname the whole family went by. All 7 Eisenhower boys used it. Dwight was the only one still using it by World War II, as I said. Camp David named after his grandson. Here's an interesting little thing. Dwight Eisenhower quit smoking by surrounding himself with cigarettes. Eisenhower smoked 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes a day, picking up the habit while he was a student at West Point and quitting only a few years before he became president. His initial attempt involved excising tobacco and the related accoutrements from his daily life. But it didn't work, so he went in another direction. I decided to make a game of the whole business and try to achieve a feeling of some superiority when I saw others smoking while I no longer did, he said. The politician crammed cigarettes and lighters into every nook of his office. I made it a practice to offer a cigarette to anyone who came in, and I lighted each while mentally reminding myself as I sat down, I don't have to do what that poor fellow is doing. Pretty cool. Thought that was kind of cool. And that's kind of pretty much it. That kind of leads us really right up to the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower, our 34th president. So, I hope you enjoyed this part 1. Hope the audio sounded okay, because I am doing it in a different spot, as I said. And we took a look at the young life and then the extensive military career of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So that was part 1. Part 2 tomorrow, we will get into the presidency, his legacy, and of course, the death and burial of Dwight D. Eisenhower, our 34th president. Thanks very much, guys, for all the support. Thank you for all you do. And keep it coming. Keep up those comments and questions. We love it. And we will see you tomorrow for part 2. Thanks, guys.